Hi guys, Dr. Ken Nordberg here again today. Same shirt. With a little tip for you. This is not a long seminar. Well, I could make it a 2-hour seminar, you know that, but not long. And a lot of you probably understand, realize that this is a good tip, that you've done it yourself many times. But you know, I started doing something when my kids were young. When they were just learning to become deer hunters, I was taking them out into a roadless wilderness area, big one, with huge spruce bogs and elder swamps, and where over the years several hunters had disappeared and were never seen again. And that kind of worried me, and so when they started hunting, I made each one of them a permanent tree stand out in the woods. Big platform, a good sturdy platform, made with pieces of tree branches or trunks of trees that had fallen, that kind of thing, but a good sturdy ladder and a railing around the place to sit on the railing and that kind of thing. And I always gave them instruction: don't leave this stand for any reason until I come back and pick you up. And as long as they did that, I wasn't too concerned, quite as worried about turning them loose into this wilderness area at first. But one of the things started to become obvious about what was happening. My kids, most of them, all but 4, I guess, all but 1 rather, took bucks their first year. And some of those bucks were really big ones, nice bucks, you know, big, good enough for the wall. And I remember my brother-in-law was sitting there when Peggy came in her second year. Had taken the big 10-pointer, was probably the second biggest one ever taken by a Nordberg. And the year before, first year, taking a nice big 8-pointer, was standing over 11 feet away when she fired at it. My brother-in-law was asking me, how come we don't get chances at big bucks like that? Well, at that time it occurred to me maybe something was happening here. And it wasn't long after that, back in the early 1970s, that we started hunting black bears. And each of my kids got a chance, well, all the boys got a chance to take a black bear. And noticed the same thing was happening. And so it occurred to me then that, you know, this works. You know, speaking of the black bears, I remember what we were doing is this. You know, when we were black bear hunting, each time we brought in bait, we were starting our baiting 2 weeks before the hunting season is, and we put all this bait. We had about 12 different kinds of bait. We put on this big plastic toboggan, tie it down so it wouldn't fall off, and then we go along a trail, and our trails were pretty long to our bear bait sites, because they were always at least a half mile from any of the nearest roads or trails after we learned that this was the thing to do if you're going to take a big bear. But so that plastic toboggan would be rattling, bumping trees and going over rocks and scraping over rocks and things all the way to the stand site. Boy, all kinds of noise. And then we put the bait in and cover the bait crib with heavy logs, usually 100-pound logs, 2 guys, 1 on each end, putting them on top. So nothing but bears could get to the bait. And other critters eating up all our bait. Well, then we'd go out and dragging that sled, and it'd be rattling and bumping into trees and all the way out. And didn't think of it much then, but one of the things we learned when it finally came time to hunt, you take one of my kids to a tree stand. Usually I would stay with them, but not always, and their first bears and a grandson and that kind of thing. But I'd go away, or maybe 3 of us went out there, and I went up into the same tree or another tree very close to the grandson or one of my kids when they took their first bears. Well, when the sound, we'd hear that sled bouncing all until you couldn't hear it anymore, way far away. And quite often, within 15 minutes, here comes bears, especially when we were on a sow range. We learned there's quite a bit of difference between a sow range and a boar range in bear hunting. But when we're on a sow range, we could have quite a few bears come to that stand site. And the younger ones first, boy, oh, they'd hear that noise coming, and they had already been accustomed to knowing that when they heard that sound coming to that place, here comes food. Now we're going, they're away, now it's safe. We're going to run in there and roll, those little bears will roll a couple logs off the top of that crib so they can get at the bait, and boy. And then pretty soon here comes a little older bear, maybe a sub-adult of the sow. She could have several sub-adults that's 2.5 and 3.5 years of age living on their range. They're finally going off to find their own ranges after that. But boy, you'd see a lot of bears there. But they were really keen on this succession of sounds that told them, here comes a hunter or a human. They weren't expecting us to be hunters. They didn't learn that yet. But they were being cautious. And then when they knew we were gone, boy, they run in. Now, so we knew early because of our bear hunting that this succession of sounds can make a real impression on whitetails as well. And if I took a child of mine to one of those tree stands I made, or elevated stands I made for them out in the woods, then walked away, they were more likely to see deer, including a big buck, than they would if they went in there themselves. Because none of us, no matter how good you are, any deer that are within 50 yards are going to hear you coming. They hear your footsteps. If they're not human-like, and human-like is to hear you take a few steps and stop, take a few steps and stop, step on big branches, crack underfoot, you know, brushing against trees, your clothing was rubbing across there. If they hear those sounds, they know that's a human, and they aren't going to be fooled. But if we did it in a way they couldn't be sure what we were, things would be different, but which is what we do nowadays. But anyway, back then, we learned that this works on deer as well. And it worked for me and my children, and so I'm passing along this tip. Now, let's say here you got a tree stand out there in the woods, or maybe a ground level blind. It could be one or the other. If I accompanied a child on the two of us out to this tree stand, and then close as silently as possible, I'd wait till the child was up there, and we'd have the gun properly attached to a thin rope with knots on it. You'd pull that thing up there, and then you get this rifle all ready to go, you know, and we're doing this all silent and sitting down. And I just got done and told them, now, don't you come down from there until I come back for you. And not loud, you know, soft. I was whispering in her ear before they climbed the tree. And then if I turned around and went back out again, making the same sounds as I did coming in, the odds were always better that that child was going to take a deer, and in this case, a buck. A buck could be 50 yards away only. And if this succession of sounds, you know, if you're coming and you're not going directly toward the deer, maybe you're going by them even a little bit, but they can't see you, they can only hear you. And if you're coming from downwind or crosswind, they can't smell you, so they hear these sounds. And if you're careful about the way you step and pick your feet up off the ground with each step, bending your knees and put them down lightly, they can't be sure. But then, when they hear the same sounds going away, going back in the direction that you came from, all of a sudden, and it doesn't take them long then, to realize that, well, whatever it was, it went away. So it's safe to move around here and become visible. Get out in the area where the person in the tree stand can see them. A good thing, you know. When it is two guys coming in, one guy getting in the stand and one guy going out, and the deer can't tell if it's one or two going out. It sounds like more than one coming in, but maybe not. That's a good tip. You know, take your kid, your child, to the tree stand in the morning early, you know, like we do it. Get up in that stand, and then walk away. And don't be especially careful about walking silently when you're going away. So that works. Or you might do something different. You know, you're going to go to a stand site nearby, which I used to do all the time when I take the kid there, and then we'd stop here, and you'd get up there, you're all set to go, and then I'd continue on my way, and rather than going there, I might go back over this way somewhere. And so it works the same way. The buck is standing over here, or deer, and eating browse or something in the morning like they do after the first week in November, and he's hearing these sounds and being real suspicious about that, but the pause was right here, the child getting up there real quietly. Then the sounds continue going off in another direction. The same thing happens, a simple thing, but it does substantially improve the person who stays behind it. It substantially improves that person's odds of taking a deer, and even a big buck. So that's what was happening when my children were during their first years of deer hunting. Once they started getting to places on their own, then it wasn't quite the same unless they did it properly, but that's another story. So keep that in mind. If you got a child who's going to be deer hunting for the first time this coming year, do this. You know, go with them to the stand site. You might have trained them. You know, maybe you're thinking, well, he only has to go 50 yards. They don't have to worry about it. That might be true, but it still would be a good idea. Go with them there, and then leave. That'll improve the child's chance of taking a deer, maybe a big buck, maybe one bigger than you've ever seen before. No, that happens. How many kids, you see them in the magazines all the time, little kids holding on the antlers of this huge buck, and that can happen. What a thrill that is. It almost ruins them for life, though. You know, from that time on, they expect to take a big buck every year, and they struggle that when they're on their own, trying to figure out where to sit and how to go about hunting big bucks. After a while, they start to realize, well, gee, there's more to this thing, you know, the deer hunting than what I'm doing to take big bucks. And so then they start to maybe study. Maybe get one of Dr. Nordberg's books and read all about it, and get to be better buck hunters because of that. And that happens to anybody who buys that 10th edition of mine. You're going to always be a better buck hunter from that time on. But anyway, a good trick. Remember that, and use it whenever you can when you're starting a beginner, maybe a friend or a nephew or whatever. Do this, and that'll help them to get started much more quickly. You don't want them to start the first year just being bored to death and not seeing any deer out there. Boy, they aren't going to be quite as excited about going the next year. Start them out right and help make sure they get a big a deer this year, whether antlerless or buck or whatever. But do that, and that'll help. So with that tip, believe it or not, I'm going to quit. and again, I'm going to say, you know what, going to deer camp here very shortly. It's that time of year where I'm going to tell you, you know, like we're going out opening morning in the dark, and we all turn to each other before we go and say, good luck, good luck, good luck, you too, good luck, see you at noon. And my buddy from Wisconsin, he's standing there, and he's the same age as I am, and then he adds, shoot straight. That's his favorite thing. And take that seriously too. Become a good marksman before the season starts. You get out to the rifle range before you go out there this year. And even if you're shooting a shotgun, it's like, get out there and practice. And don't do it all from a standing position. You're not going to learn so much about how good you are, or where your bullet is going. Get on the rest and work and make sure your weapon hits right where you want it to hit every time you take aim. And once you know your rifle's that good, well, from then on, brace it against a tree trunk in front of you or something like that. That when you take your shot. You know, unless the deer is right there, you know, you should be able to hit it offhand, but be careful about things like that. Well, with that, I'm going to make it a two-hour thing after all. with that, goodbye now, gang, and I'll talk to you again soon. Hey guys, Dr. Ken Nordberg again. I got a quick tip I want to provide you with. It's called the two-man approach to a stand site. You know, I first learned this from bear hunting. And I've taken my kids to bear stands when they were young, when they were hunting their first bear, and take them to the stand site. Like, there was one place we had a lake there, and we'd have to go in all the way around and get over here, and a bait site there. And finally it's opening morning. We've been baiting for a couple of weeks, just twice, once a week, and we bring in lots of bait. I won't go into that, but whenever we took bait in there, we took it in on a plastic toboggan, sides on it, and we'd lash it down on there. And that thing was always rattling and making noises, going over rocks and logs all the way out to the bait site. And then we'd go out. Now, that was dynamite, doing that for younger bears. Because as we learned later, take a son or a grandson to his first bear bait site. We'd go around there in the morning or in the afternoon when they were hunting in the morning. But in the early afternoon, make all this racket, go out here and get up in his tree stand, get ready for that. And there's a bait site right out here in front of him. And then go rattling out here. Now, if you're on a sow range, more than likely, after all that, the two guys going in and then one going out, that plastic toboggan rattling all the way, and finally can't hear it anymore. We've had younger bears come in within 15 minutes after he could no longer hear that thing going out. There's, oh boy, here comes the food, and oh boy, he's gone now, it's safe to come in here. And we thought, that might work really good for deer hunting as well. So a couple of three of them, when they were young, I took them to their first stand sites. Two of us walking. We weren't dragging toboggans, but deer have really good hearing. That's their #1 way of staying out of trouble. So they're listening all the time. Even when they're sleeping, their ears are listening. And if your ear's something that sounds like something approaching that could be dangerous, they wake up. And so hearing is really important to them. And so anyway, so you don't have to make a lot of noise to make it work. But you can take, say, your son on his first visit, or your wife, or somebody, take them in and walk in. You don't have to make a lot of noise. Just walking will be enough. They'll hear you. If there's any deer in this area where you're going to stand on, they're going to hear you. You can't keep it from them. Even me and my sons, we go in alone. We're always knowing that they're probably hearing me. But one of our precautions is that they might hear our footsteps, but if we do it right, they will have an awful hard time trying to decide whether you're a hunter or a deer or a moose or a deer. The moose and the bears can walk like they're walking in the air. They make very little sound, but it's important that they hear some sounds. What is that? And if they can't be sure, they won't run away. They'll stay in the area. They might stop feeding and walk over to some cover, some trees, plump them, and just stand there and wait and listen. And then you get there finally, and all of a sudden it's really silent there. Well, with the kids, you take them in for the first time, and they're going to hear us coming. And get the kid up in the stand, or your wife, or a new friend that's going to hunt for the first time. Get them up there, then walk out. And we've taken quite a few deer, including some trophy class bucks doing that. The two-man approach going in, and when you're deer hunting, do it quietly. Don't talk, nothing of that. If you got some, nudge them and then whisper real soft. And then you get them in there, put them down, and then go out. Or like in years past, what I've done, well, I had a stand site over here somewhere. So you take him in and get him over here, and he gets up in his stand quietly. His gun up there, loaded, all set to go, and then continue on my way to my stand site, away from there. So I hear it's like you're leaving the area. So the deer, they think that whoever they, or whatever they heard, kept going. Or they might say, well, that's a human, no doubt about it. Well, even so, they move away, now you're gone. And half hour passes and they're moving around, nothing to worry about. Whatever it was, it went over here somewhere and it's safe here. So one man, two going in and one going away, apparently, you know, if you're quiet, they don't think it's two people, it's just one. They haven't got it figured out there was two. So you go away and they think you're gone. The two-man approach has worked for centuries, for fathers bringing to their sons to stand sites for the first time, or daughters, like in my case, and they've taken a big buck right away, getting huge bucks. But when you've done it, you can do it every day of the hunting season. But let me tell you, you don't get away with this with older bucks by doing it often at the same stand site. You know, maybe once or twice it'll work there. But if you're planning for your son to sit there the whole deer season, you can do this day after day, and it probably gets to be more and more likely they know that's a human. And they go over there later and use fresh human trail scent on this trail, fresh human trail scent. So you can't do it every day. This is short-term conditioning. Conditioning a deer to think you're gone. The two-man approach and one going away. Going back the original way, or continue on in another direction from that area. So that'll work. So it works good. It works good on young bears. You don't get away with it so easily on older bears. Maybe it'll work once, the first time you use it on an older bear going to a bait site. Or maybe twice. But it's a good tip. You know, a lot of young kids have gotten big bucks on their first hunting season because their fathers took them to the stand site and then left them. And unfortunately, from that moment on, he thinks he's really grown. I've had kids come up to me at sports shows and they want to show me, oh, go ahead, Dr. Nordberg's coming. I'm going to show them this picture. And they come over to my booth and look at the one I got last year. And there's a kid, he's maybe 11, 12 years old. Look at this big, beautiful, oh man, beautiful, what is the score? I said, oh, that one was 189. Oh, well, congratulations. Yeah, he says, I've got the best spot. Boy, I'm going to get lots of bucks. Now, going to that same spot, he doesn't even realize what his father did to make that happen. He thinks it was his own good hunting method once he was there, being quiet enough, sitting still long enough. But he thinks that's going to be a hot spot for taking a big buck for the rest of his life. You know, I've had one come to me many years later, and I never told him, well, you can't, you know, that's not going to be a hot spot for years and years. You wait and see. I didn't tell him. I didn't want to discourage him, but he came back and he says, you know, that was the only big one I ever saw. When I went to that spot, I had to keep finding more and more, and that's kind of hard to find. And he didn't know the 8 characteristics of a mature buck effective stand site. Well, back in the old days, I didn't know those characteristics myself. So anyway, keep that trick in mind. It's good for 1, maybe 2 bucks at one stand site, but maybe more if you keep using it at different stand sites every year with another member of your party or your son or daughter or wife, that kind of thing. So there you go. Okay, with that now, before you click off, quick, don't click off yet. Click that subscribe button, will you? And it only takes a minute to subscribe, and also that thumbs up button for me, okay? Good luck hunting to all of you this fall. Get a big buck this year. I wish you all could. And we'll talk about it after the season. Thanks a lot, guys. I'll see you again soon. Be sure to visit my website. Here's the link. Here you'll find links to my blog posts, my Twitter account, my YouTube account, my Amazon store with links to my ebooks, my son's eBay store, a money saver if you're ordering from Canada or other countries, my website bookstore, and much more.